Welcome back to Robot Cantina. Today we're going to put this 719cc turbo diesel Saturn on a diet. Our plans are to remove as much weight as possible while allowing the car to still be street legal. And that means we have to keep some of the stuff on the car, like the bumpers, the headlights, plus all the other junk required by law. Now, off camera, we've already gotten started with a few modifications. Unfortunately, we had to remove the exhaust stack that was poking through the hood. Now, while the exhaust stack looked cool, it made driving this car very difficult because of the fumes. Also, with the hood stack, the tiny RHB 31 turbocharger was having a tough time building boost, and today we need all the boost we can get. So the last time we drove this Saturn, the fuel rack was trimmed to provide decent power with less exhaust smoke. Now with those rack adjustments along with the hood stack, we were able to squeeze 80 miles per gallon from this very unusual Saturn. Well, today we want more power, so the rack was adjusted for maximum power by setting the fuel rack trim screw to 31.3 millimeter. Now, just to confirm that the car is at its maximum potential, we took the car out to our improvised drag strip and did a quick 0 to 60 test. The time to match or beat is 26.73 seconds. Oh, and once again I'd like to thank Brian over at Madman for letting us use the Madman EMS3 gauges. We did an episode a few months back on this remarkable gauge package. I'll put a link in the description if you want to learn more. Anyway, for the folks who care, we have exhaust gas temperature, RPM, battery voltage, and yeah, I know the voltage is a bit low. Oh, and engine coolant temperature, and of course turbo boost. Alright, let's do this. Well, it looks like we're a split second slower, but well within the margin of error. Now, the 0 to 55 was only 23.06 seconds, and just to compare, that's a whopping 7 seconds faster than our 670cc Predator-powered 1969 Renault. The weird thing is, the Renault feels faster and definitely launches harder. Meh, we'll get back to the Renault next week and see if we can find some more speed. So as most of you folks know, this car is going to the scrapyard in a few days. It's been a great car to experiment on, and we've gotten some impressive numbers from it. But overall, this car is just way too heavy to use for future projects, and right now it tips the scale at 2,043 pounds. Now, a few things before we get started on the weight reduction. First of all, yes, the car is absolutely going to the scrapyard. And of course, before we scrap the car, we'll be removing the engine and all the custom parts to use on our next project. Now, a lot of folks have contacted me directly to inquire about purchasing the car. Keep in mind, this car has close to $8,000 in parts that we need for our next project. And this car clearly isn't worth $8,000, but that's how much we value the parts on this car. Anyway, none of that matters, because by the time you see this video, well, the car will have already been scrapped. Also, even though the car looks decent on video, the reality is the car is in really bad condition, and basically everything on the car is either broken or damaged. And of course, let's not forget the car was involved in a major collision in the past, and it has a rebuilt title. The work they did to put this car back on the road, well, it's subpar. The car has a bent subframe up front, and all the welding they did was very questionable. Yep, we knew this from the beginning, so it's not a surprise to us, but unfortunately it's time to retire this car. Now, let's get on with the weight reduction, and at this point, I'm not afraid to use the Sawzall if I have to. So if you didn't already know, Saturn S series are basically just a big go-kart with plastic body panels tacked on. Once we pulled all the big stuff, we went back and focused on all the little parts as well. Now, like I said earlier, we need to keep the car street legal, and that means the bumpers, the lights, and other things need to stay on the car. Actually, I do believe fenders are required as well, but hopefully the cops won't notice. So in order to make the car invisible to the police, we're going to be keeping the hubcaps. Now, small details like this make a big difference in how the car is viewed by law enforcement. Usually when the car is missing its hubcaps, well, they tend to take a second look. Our plan is to confuse them by leaving the hubcaps on. We tried to take the rear window and side windows out in one piece, but unfortunately we broke them when trying to remove them with a hammer. Believe it or not, glass is actually very heavy. Now, the door glass came out in one piece because by then we figured out a hammer wasn't the right tool for the job. Inside the car, well, we left the carpeting in place, and that's to help reduce the vibrations that affect our camera equipment. And the carpet also covers up the massive rust holes in the floor. Overall, the interior really didn't account for much in weight reduction. Now, we did keep the dashboard in place, and all the stuff hidden behind it's still there. You see, right now in Kansas, it's over 100 degrees out, and taking the dash out along with the HVAC stuff, well, that just wasn't going to happen. And that turned out to be a very good decision because later on when we road tested the car, we actually needed to use the heater core to help control the engine temperature. On the rear of the car, we kept the lightweight plastic bumper and attached the taillights using duct tape. This open area provides plenty of ventilation and should help reduce the aroma of diesel fuel that our crew is all too familiar with. Now, it's hard to say how much weight we actually took off the car. Most of the stuff was lightweight plastic, and the only really heavy parts were the glass, the hood, and the trunk lid. And my best guess is it's about 300 pounds, but that's just a guess. I reckon we should take the car over to the farmer's co-op and put it on a scale to get an accurate measurement. Now, before we started with the weight reduction, the car weighed 2,046 pounds, and after removing some unnecessary parts, we're at 1,785 pounds. That works out to be a difference of 261 pounds. Not much, but keep in mind there's also another 100 pounds or so of stuff on the car that we need to keep in order to legally drive the car on the roads here in Kansas. So right away I noticed the car feels lighter, and even though it's incredibly hot, well, the car is very comfortable to drive with the better ventilation. On the downside, the car seems to rattle quite a bit more than usual. Now, if you're semi-new to this channel and are familiar with our 1969 Renault that we're experimenting with, well, you're probably also aware the Renault has an unusual transmission. Now on this Saturn, well, it has a proper 5-speed gearbox with a real clutch. On this build, we mated a 719cc Kubota turbo diesel refrigerator engine to a close ratio Saturn MP3 transmission. The little 719cc engine that we're using was originally rated for 20 horsepower, and of course that's without the turbo and a few other mods. And I reckon that's about right. However, with the turbo and a few other tweaks, we figure the engine's developing about 30 to 35 horsepower. Now, it's likely that the absence of the body panels will affect both the fuel economy and the top speed, but today we're only going to be focused on the 0 to 60 times, and we'll get to that in a moment. Alright, let's find out how much this lightweight Saturn performs with a turbocharged 719cc engine. The time to beat for 0 to 55 is 23.06 seconds and 27.13 seconds for the 0 to 60.
Go!
Well, compared to the results we got earlier in the video, the lightweight Saturn is faster, but not by much. And if we look at this screenshot of a video we made a month or so ago, well, the 0 to 60 times are exactly the same, and we only picked up a tiny amount on the 0 to 55. Now, of course, when we strip the nose off the car, that doesn't help with the aerodynamics, so we may gain a little bit of speed with the weight reduction and lose a little bit of speed with the added aerodynamic drag. Now, that's interesting for sure, but I do have another concern. Let's take a look at a snapshot of the test we just did. And I apologize, it's hard to see because the camera was vibrating, but the boost maxed out at 13 psi and the wastegate is set for 15 or 16 psi. Now, if we look at a snapshot from a previous video, well, we can see the turbo is definitely generating 15 psi boost. So it's possible we may have a blown gasket somewhere after the turbo. Possibly a blown intake manifold gasket? At this point, it's hard to say. We did check a few things and they looked fine, but unfortunately, we didn't check the intake manifold gasket yet because it's buried on the back side of the engine, and it's probably easier to inspect the manifold gasket with the engine out of the car. And since the engine's going to be removed anyway, well, that's not a big deal. We'll post a video of what we find when we take this car apart. Now, one more thing. No doubt you folks noticed that this car leaves a trail of black smoke whenever it accelerates, and that's because we adjusted the fuel rack for maximum fuel at 15 psi of boost. So, until the turbo can generate 15 psi of boost, well, the exhaust is going to be a bit dirty. Now, this smokescreen feature on our Saturn sort of makes the car undrivable in an urban environment, but it can be fixed so the exhaust is visibly clean. You see, on all turbo diesel engines, they have a gizmo that automatically adjusts the fuel depending on how much boost the turbo generates. Now, unfortunately, this engine was never designed for a turbo, and such a gizmo doesn't exist for this specific engine, and it's doubtful any off-the-shelf part would work. So, we're going to modify the fuel system to have a stepper motor that moves the rack limit screw in and out depending on the boost pressure. Now, keep in mind, this is a simplified illustration, and the actual mechanism will be a bit more complex, and will require the engine to be partially disassembled in order to build a robust interface that can handle the vibrations of the diesel engine. As far as the electronics to make this work, well, that's not a big deal for me because stepper motors are my favorite thing to play with, and after all, I do have a robotics background. Anyway, we have a solution to solve the smoke situation when this engine's used in our next project. Plus, we're going to do a few things differently next time. Overall, the diesel Saturn experiment has given us a lot of data to build a new and improved car, and we're betting the performance and fuel economy will also be a lot better. This Saturn has served us well over the past year, but it's time to let it go. I hope you folks enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you next time.